What is education, and why is education important? Is it important? After all, what's the real purpose of getting educated about anything? We so frequently take education and the process for learning in general totally for granted. Not only that, but the ways in which we think. How we've gone about structuring our own consciousness itself has largely remained unchanged for a long, long time. So how do we literally change our minds? Can we reconfigure our own ways of thinking? And if so, how? Join Dr. Joseph Atman, the founder of one of the world's most revolutionary educational centers, Middletree, and award-winning broadcaster Tammy Trujillo for Educate Everyone, and explore the mysteries of our own consciousness and the education we implement in order for it to be what it is.
This week on Educate Everyone, we continue our conversation with Joshua Faden. He's the founder of Community of Teachers, an education consultancy focused on building student confidence through strong relationships and personalized support. He's a former teacher himself and youth worker. He's also the author of The Confidence Project, which outlines his model for fostering engaged lifelong learners. Here's the rest of his conversation with Dr. Joe Atman.
I think you're right to start with sparking curiosity, right? The whole thing is about building confidence, as you mentioned. I mean, that's right in the title of the work, The Confidence Constellation.
Yes.
So, right, that's the whole thing. And because it all kind of emanates from that when you're a student. And again, it kind of goes back to my point about, putting in effort is far more important than seeing a result, because that's all about getting up off the mat if and when you get knocked down and being able to continually do that again and again. And when you have confidence in yourself, when you have, the kind of faith in yourself in the process, then you're always going to get up. You're always going to be willing to accept whatever challenge comes next, whatever that might be. The other thing I think that you talked about that's a really important component to all of this, that you talked about explicitly, that we do at Middletree, but is something that really needs to be touched on, is that providing a space for students. We forget, young people, they don't really have a place in this world that they can truly and really frequently, really call their own. Yeah, they have their home, of course, but that's parents. And certainly not every student has a safe home life or a home life that would be, considered stable or in a litany of different ways. But even students who are loved and do have a stable environment, they might have their own room and whatnot, but frequently their place at home is not exactly something that you and I would consider, home, this is mine, I earned this, this is something I've chosen for myself, given my circumstances. And that's not really their space. So creating as many places that you can, and as many environments, even if they're just kind of microclimates for students, is so important, like you did with Fran. You created a place in an environment that she wasn't comfortable with, and you let her sort of ornament and decorate that space with her activities, just given that you invited her to sit with you at lunch. Well, she didn't want to engage at first, and then you got her to bust out of her shell. It's really just like ornamenting and decorating your own room or whatever in your home that's a shared space and environment maybe with others, is that you get a little bit of a place to sort of stretch out and put your own stuff up on the walls and communicate and engage and interact with the world in a way that is comfortable for you, and that you get to sort of discover again that relationship that you might have to the world and to yourself, which is something I talk about all the time. And I think something that education just doesn't allow for with its students hardly at all. But it's so important to give students as many spaces as we can provide for them without letting the complete and total leash off of them per se, because everybody needs guidance, especially young people. So there's got to be a balance there. I'm not saying, it's a free for all by any stretch of the imagination, but I think providing and creating an environment for students where they feel comfortable. It's almost like if anybody's ever taken in an abused or abandoned animal before, it's a while before that creature feels at home, because they're bringing with them all this past trauma or, an environment where or maybe they were malnourished or whatever the case might be. It's just terrible to make that analogy, but we do similar things with our students so far as abusing them psychologically and otherwise academically. And we don't even mean to do it necessarily, but it's just the way that things are frequently set up. So again, just providing a really supportive or just a space for students, whatever that might be and however that might look like, I think is super, super important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, again, each student brings with them their own, like you said, their own baggage to your classroom, right? And I used to have a mentor of mine who would say, you never know what they're bringing to the classroom, but they are bringing themselves to the classroom that day, right? And so that alone is a gift, and it's something that we shouldn't take for granted, and it's something that we need to respect and to honor. And to that point, then, part of it too is within that space, it's acknowledging that there's multiple different ways that they can achieve their goals, not just the one size fits all. Hey, we tried one thing, it didn't work, therefore we can't support you, we can't help you, we can't do this. But it's saying, again, it doesn't have to be hip hop and ballet. You know, I've worked with students over the years, and one of them loves spiders. And so I know that there's 27 spider books on first grade level in the local library, you know, and whatever it is that that student loves, like to your point, you know, when you were talking about adorning the room, I'm picturing, you know, letting them almost literally and figuratively put up posters of what they love, of being able to see themselves in that learning environment, right? So where Fran didn't see herself in a learning environment, well, now all of a sudden, well, I might not see myself yet, but I see on the walls, there's things that I love, right? There's things that interest me. There's things that are kind of calling me and getting my attention. And to that point too, is I think this is an important thing that I often talk about with educators is we ourselves might not be the right person to help that child or that individual or that person working with overcome the particular challenge that they might be facing. And that's okay, because I think oftentimes as educators, we're expected to kind of be the end all be all because, especially for elementary, right, we're in a self-contained classroom most of the time. We might not have other supports in the classroom, depending on where we are in the country. And so we have to be able to control or have some level of control is what we're taught to think, right? But at the end of the day, when we relinquish some of that control and we say, you know what, I see that you're struggling. I know that I've tried different things. I might not be the best person that can help you with this. Let's see who else is in your tree, who's in your constellation, if you will, of people that can help you. And let's find you the person that can help you with this. And that in of itself might be the biggest gift we can teach kids too, is that there's multiple different people you can turn to. There's multiple ways to get what you need. And it's not just one person that is the end all be all. We might be the one that's providing the education for that moment, for that year, for that grade. But at the end of the day, as adults, as learners just in general, the reality is we learn all the time in all different spaces, in all different places. And if we can see how to get what we need and know that we're going to continue to get what we need regardless of what obstacles come our way, that to me is where the power comes in. The space that they're adorning becomes bigger and bigger, right? And they now start to see the world as their classroom. They start to see everywhere they go as having the posters that they love up on the wall, that they can find a poster they love wherever they go. And that, to me, is where it really becomes a beautiful part of their learning journey and their life experience. And outside of a classroom, that's where, to me, the magic happens, right? When they can start to put all these skills together and see that they're transferable and that their confidence can come with them wherever they are, whatever they're doing. That's what I love. You know, I have one student of mine who's now, I tutored him when he was in first grade. I taught him in third grade. I worked with him all the way up through high school. He was playing semi-professional soccer in Italy and just came back from a stint over there. You know, he said to me, time to grind is what he always say. Time to grind, Mr. Faden. And, you know, it's time for the next challenge, time for the next thing. And he literally just, his birthday was just last week. And I texted him, I said, happy birthday. And he said, I'm excited for another year filled with confidence. And to me, like, I literally got teary. It's just that in of itself, that has become something so ingrained in this person that they now take this everywhere they go. And this is their goal for their next year of life. Like that to me was everything. Like I literally was like, okay, I can die now. Like that was just everything, just getting that one text, because that says everything, right? It's like that to me is the end goal. It's not about, like you said, can I recall facts on a test? Can I pass this, that, or the other thing? Can I get an A on a project? That to me is our end goal. If I have a child that can text me 10, 15 years later and say, I'm excited for another year filled with confidence, I mean, come on. Like, that's, to me, was just the greatest thing.
Absolutely. I really like how you framed your work just in general as building that confidence. I've already mentioned it several times here in this conversation. For me, it's all about effort, which is kind of the same thing, right? It doesn't matter if how well exactly you comprehend or understand a particular thing, you still have a way forward, whatever that might be. And you have a self-image and a perception, not only of yourself, I shouldn't say this, but an image and a perception that you're able to discover something or to, again, just keep moving ahead. There is a way forward, whatever that looks like. Maybe you're bad at biology. You're not a biologist. Okay. You might be a great musician and haven't even discovered that yet. When I was in school, again, I hate to sit here and just, rag on the system that we put up. And because we're all complicit in it.
Sure.
Just agreeing to be like, yeah, this is just how we do education,
Right.
But like, there's not enough self-evaluation within our system and within probably our society. We're not taught with at least enough rigor to do some very basic self-reflective practices, to do some very basic things that would sort of help us to understand what those passions, what that, as you've phrased and termed it, what your why is, what's your purpose? Why should you be confident? Why should you continue to exude, that confidence and show that effort that I'm so high on and keep those things going? How do you look at and come up against challenges? Those tools are not given to us frequently enough. They're not baked into our society enough in general. And then we go searching for all these outside answers when we become adults. When we're young, when we're kids, we don't maybe even know enough to understand that we should look for that. I use the example of being a bad biologist and then being a musician. I didn't even consciously really, put that out there. But I was terrible at science. I started playing the piano at like 17 years old, 18 years old. And I've played it ever since. And that's something I'm good at and that I love to do. And I shouldn't even say I'm not good at. I love to do it. So I don't even care. I'm not Chopin by any stretch of the imagination. But like I love to do it. And so who cares? Again, I don't know. It just goes back to if you have the confidence, if you have that willpower and that effort ingrained and instilled within you, and if we could combine that with, again, more reflective practices within education, I think we'd all be better off just in general as we get out of the classroom and into real life and into adulthood.
I think to that point, that's kind of why you and I do what we do, right? You talk about us all being complicit, but the truth of the matter is between Middletree and community of teachers, like we're trying to say, let's not be complicit. Let's do things differently, right? Like let's build that in. I literally just finished creating this whole new product called the Confidence Capsule, which is exactly what you're talking about. It's helping kids to be able to, beginning of the year, look at where they want to get with their confidence journey and literally create a capsule that they can lock at the end of the day and put away and come back at the end of the year and throughout the year and be reflective on it. So to your point, like we are fighting against that element of complicitness because it's something that is so essential and we do see the need for it. And so I think that is why, again, I assume that's why we're here talking in this conversation and that's why you're doing the podcast, is to say what is something that we could be doing differently to actually provide what we know needs to be happening, what we see and where it can come from. And so for me, that's what I love doing this. That's why I love this conversation. I love talking to you about this because that reflective part, it's so essential to say, what are my goals? Where do I want to go? How can I get there? What's the next step? Where did I come? And to that point then, what could I do differently? You talked about science as the example, right? Scientists, if they fail 99% of the time, that one success might be what changes the world. And so they keep going to find that one success and they learn from the failures. At some point, we start taking that out of our kids. My thing, and I know you're with me on this, is let's put that back in. Let's build that into the biology, if you will, the genomes of the actual school systems and the systems that we use to create that works with our kids, because that's where the magic happens. Like I say, that's the power of your effort that you talk about and knowing where and how to place the effort and then coming back to and saying, okay, I worked really hard. did I meet my goal? Yes or no? And the no being okay. It's okay to say, no, I didn't meet that particular goal. And then be reflective, like you said, and say, well, why not? What could I do differently? How could I keep going? And beyond, okay, we might have moved on from this particular unit, this particular lesson, this particular test. I still want to be a learner in life. So how can I keep going to get what I need and to make my learning process be something that works for me so that my end result of understanding might be different from my, like you said, a grade or a particular number that was put on a piece of paper.
Yeah, we're so afraid of failure as human beings in general. And again, I've got to think that all of these are learned behaviors. And then you have to think about, well, if they're learned behaviors, where did we learn them? And again, I hate to just point fingers in directions away from the work that you and I are doing. And I think it is true that you point out that while we are all responsible for it, maybe not all of us are complicit in just saying, well, the education system is just what it is. Sure. And of course, like anything, everything is evolving all the time. And I mean, there are so many great people within.
Yes, absolutely.
Maybe I said this on every episode that I've ever done it with Educate. I think teachers are like the biggest victims of the school system in general. We can get into that conversation or not. Right. But where did we learn this behavior? That failure is something that needs to be avoided at all costs. And part of it has to be, I'm not saying fully and totally, but part of it comes from the way we do education, in that if you only get 59% of the answers correctly, you've failed, right? You know what I mean? Like on that particular test or whatever. Like you said about the scientist who fails 1,000 times. The one success, the one breakthrough he or she has is the cure for whatever. When I just going back to what I said before about being a musician, when I sit down to play, it's not like, I'm not Paul McCartney. I don't, every time I sit down, come up with a genius song, which it seems like is what he did every time he sat down.
Pretty much.
Pretty much.
Right. Only for 60 years, though.
Yeah, but only, but even the greats, and the Da Vinci's, the Picassos, most of the output that you do as an artist or as, an accountant for that matter, you're going to be pushing water uphill, or it's going to feel like that. But that's okay. That's part of the process. And if we don't sit here and label those things as failures or as even end points, because there's something that seems final about failure, and maybe there's something that seems final about success as well, but it doesn't, maybe it's not as ominous. So it's like, how do you get that whole thought process of, to turn that around with that outlook on failure, with that outlook on really just what is a very natural process and in the order of not just things academically, but things in life. Not everything that you do is this magical, wonderful, beautiful breakthrough. And that's okay, because that's part of the process. And you're always learning something, I think, is kind of where I'm driving that.
No, I think I also love what you said, just the finality of success being kind of the other side of the coin, the finality of failure is a really interesting thing. I was a straight A student, the opposite of what you're talking about. I was struggling. It came easy for me, right? But you ask me what I learned in 7th grade math, in 7th grade history, in 9th grade, whatever, likely that I would really struggle to be able to give you specifics of what I actually learned in any particular class, right? To that point of, it was just, for me, it was much more about making sure that whatever was on my paper was that A, right? Regardless of whether or not I actually understood the stuff, regardless of if the next day it would still be in my brain, right? But for me, I lost the meaning in many ways, which is why I love doing what I do now, because I help to provide the meaning, right? Because I felt like I was myself robbed of that in some ways. And again, to your point of I took that on too, and I let that become who I was, and that I had to be defined that way. And I allowed myself to say, this is an important part of my persona. But when I look back, I'm like, wow, what would have been like if I had actually been able to just say, you know what, I really just enjoy learning. I don't care what I get. I just want to keep learning this particular thing. And when the test is over, I'm not going to stop, right? And in the book, I talk about the challenge cycle that I use. I talk about it in terms of a metaphor of like running around a track. And I think of this in terms of like we were talking about with failures and successes even, right? If you just do something once, if you run around that track one time, right, and you come back, you're like, whew, man, That was a good lap. Why am I not in shape? I don't understand. Like, I just ran a full lap, right? But I just, like, to that point, I overcame one challenge. I learned to overcome one challenge. Okay, great. But when you learn that as a habit, right? And again, I often joke in the trainings that people talk of this runner's high. I've never experienced it because I'm not a runner myself, but there is that moment where you get in the flow, right? Where it doesn't matter if you run a mile or you run 26 miles for people who run marathons, right? Like, you're just in it and you get to that point. And for me, that's where I try to help students to get to that flow, regardless of where they're starting and regardless of what it looks like for them, because it's going to be different for each student. But if I can, like I said, the reason why my challenge, I call it the cycle, is because at the end of one part of the cycle, you start your next lap. So if I get students to be able to say, okay, I've increased my receptivity, I increased my awareness to this challenge, I manage my frustrations, I can value my effort, and I actually value the challenge itself as the final phase of my challenge cycle, then you start again with, let's go back to increasing our receptivity, right? And it just continues. So now we have students who see the value in a particular challenge, and now are looking for the next one to begin to increase the receptivity to that next challenge. And it becomes something that they're excited about. And like, to your point of the effort being the process itself, that's where the excitement comes in, right? Because then the student is able to say, man, I can't wait to find another challenge. I can't wait to find another obstacle because I'm going to overcome that and it's going to be incredible. And I'm going to learn to value that effort and the actual process that I went through to get there. And again, to your point, like, there's so much more value in that than any particular thing that we could teach anybody. So yeah, I 100% agree with you on that. And I do love that part of it too, because to your point too, then if we don't harp on the success, even we don't say, okay, you did it, you're done. We say, well, this is life, right? Like, there's always going to be obstacles, whenever there's like a challenge in my life. My mom always says, well, that's life, like how we overcome them. It's what we do. It's how we do the next step with that, right? Like, it's unrealistic to think, okay, I overcome that challenge, I'm done, right? Like, right. That's just never going to happen in our lifetime. So, right, but we can learn to say, okay, let's embrace it. Let's get excited by it.
We don't teach ourselves, and we especially don't teach our students to love learning, right? I think as adults, we at some point are like, oh, I'm very interested in World War II. I'm going to watch a documentary on that or whatever, right?
Right.
And you discover that you are curious about things and that the brain is actually, at least that part of it, is actually designed to learn and to take on things and to expand. And that's the whole point. I can take this from a philosophical bent and say, that's the whole point of consciousness. That's the whole point of phenomena, is to continue to engage and interact with itself, and thus by doing so expand itself. But there's no stoppage to that process. There is no end point. And so you have to figure out how to love the process. And we don't instill the love of learning within students well enough in a way that love continues and is perpetuated throughout not only the learning process, but into adulthood and into other areas and sectors of our lives where that curiosity, where that seeking of the why and the passion and the effort, and not defining and labeling things as particular places on their journey so far as, starting, stopping, success, failure, yada, yada. We haven't trained the human mind to simply kind of go with the flow of the world as much as it is hell-bent, the human mind that is, hell-bent on defining, continuing to label things, continuing to try and make sense of. And again, there's a absolute place for all of that. But when you harp too greatly and overly emphasize definitions of things that we have to categorize and slot as particular ways of being, then we're isolated from new experiences and new definitions and evolving processes and procedures around those definitions that we've come up with. And it's so important to have the proper definitions, the proper outlook on things, because our own experiences are then reflected in those definitions and vice versa. And again, we just don't teach students, and we don't have enough of this for adults either, to think along those lines or to really be capable of experiencing the world in such a way.
Yeah, and then we rob ourselves of that experience. We rob ourselves of really this beautiful opportunity of learning something differently. Like if we go in as teachers and we think, I have a way to get here, but it might not be the only way, right? Like think about the power of that. Think about the power of let students be part of the teaching process, because that's really what learning is, right? It's learning and then being able to teach it and then being able to bring it in and internalize it and then be able to use it. Right. And so we're trying to help kids to climb that ladder of inference and to be able to understand what their understanding of a particular topic is. And then we're helping them to be able to think in a way that hopefully, like to your point, how cool would it be if you have a child who thinks something that you never in a million years would have thought of? Right. Like be open to that wonder, be open to that possibility. I used to do an activity with my third graders of the number is 17. How did I get there? Something very open-ended. And there's as many ways of getting to 17
I love that.
As there are grains of sand, right?
Yeah, sure.
And the beauty of it to that point is
that's a great exercise.
Take away this idea of it needs to be right or wrong, right? Because again, somebody might say 18 minus 1 is 17. Someone else says, well, 16 plus 1 is 17. Yes. You're right. But then you get kids that say like, well, you can allow for that different levels of differentiation, right? With that question, right? Because then you've got that precocious child who's like really excited by math and is like, well, what if I do 4 squared plus 1? And kids like, what's squared mean? It's like, it just means it's multiplied by itself. So 4 times 4 is 16 plus 1 is still 17. They're like, oh my gosh, but it opens the world up to new possibilities, right? And that to me is like, to your point, that to me is what education and what learning is about, and what it should be about at least, is opening ourselves up to new possibilities and then being able to think differently and being able to debate our understandings so we can then come to our own understandings and be able to then teach that in a way to others and be able to continue that on in whatever form that it shows up, I guess.
And there's such a creative process. And again, that's another thing that I don't think we harp on nearly enough, is how to create creativity. And I love that idea of, like open Jeopardy, right? Here's the, I hate to say even the answer, but here's the thing, newspaper, what made me say that? How did we get there? But like, it's about creating creativity and turning on that part of our brains and beings to allow that to flow, because the whole goal of evolving, of having children, of educating them, of doing all this, is so that they do produce different answers than the generation before, and they do have a different interpretation, and hopefully an interpretation and a set of, I don't even want to say answers per se, because I'm not sure I completely necessarily believe in defined answers as this is the way that it is, because everything in my perspective is a relationship, and relationships are constantly changing. So what a relationship might be here and now is going to be different than it is in the future and as it was in the past. But figuring out those relationships, defining those relationships for themselves, and they should be nuanced, generation to generation, parent to child. I think a huge mistake that we make as adults is telling young people this is the way that it is. I do think that you need to guide people, and I think morals and ethics and all that stuff is important.
Yes, of course.
Right? But you need to make people understand why those things are important, and then they're going to figure out for themselves at some point. I think there's an innate goodness in all of us, and we can't really be who we fully are unless we abide by that goodness and unless we abide by that nature of, who we really are, just in general. And so you can operate within the parameters of that golden rule, treating others, the way that you would want to be treated. And I think it starts from there. But at the same time, I think you need to allow not only individuals, but generations the space to create their own space. It kind of comes back to what we were talking about previously, right? You need to allow folks an environment, a space, a place where they can grow that confidence, where they can create narratives about themselves, and hopefully ones that are positive and reinforced with the confidence that you strive, to instill in your students. And hopefully, along with all of that comes a love for learning, a love for exploring, that capacity to, again, create creativity. All of that stuff is so super important. And I hope that we're able to be better, both individually and societally, to give that to people, to give that to the next generation, and to understand that wherever we're at with this currently is that we can continue to ourselves evolve it and be better at it and come up with our own new ways and methodologies for giving that to others, because that's the greatest gift I think that we can pass on, is giving people the gift of that discovery of themselves, for themselves, with themselves, by themselves. So, and I think as educators, at the end of it, you shake everything else out and sift through it all, is we're trying to allow people to create that space to discover who they are. And again, what that relationship between themselves and their own world, their own minds looks like, and give them the language and the tools to be able to interact with it, and the capacity to interact with it on a conscious level, and do so in a way that hopefully is productive for them and all of those that they touch and interact with.
Yeah. And again, to that point, it's why I also do trainings for adults too, right? Like, because if we don't work on ourselves to be able to allow that space for ourselves, how can we possibly know how to do it for others and for the students and children we work with? So, in my trainings with adults, I'm constantly starting activities with, there is no right or wrong. and every time adults are like, yeah, but I'm doing this right, I'm doing this wrong. And it's like, no. I don't, when I say that, I mean it, right? And it's like, if we can embody that, then we can then reflect that back to those that we work with.
100%. So, Joshua, before we get out of here, what is the best advice that you can give to parents, to teachers, as to how they can be the best for their students, their children?
I think it comes down to that first element in my confidence constellation, curiosity, right? Like, if we lead with curiosity, both for ourselves and our children and our students, I think that we just become better individuals, better humans, and better able to be open to, like we talked about, everything, right? We talked about, we're open then to what's possible. We're open then to thinking differently. We're open to different possibilities, right? So instead of looking for the one final answer to something, if we're curious about what the answer actually even is or what it means, and we're curious about why our children are thinking the way that they're thinking, or why they're acting the way they're acting, or why the adults in their lives are doing things they're doing, if we just lead with that curiosity, I think that it helps us to be more present, and it helps us to see more possibilities. And so, again, it's not the end all be all. It's not the final answer to anything, as we talked about, but I think that that's a really great place to just kind of start. And then from there, it's kind of just having those conversations and talking to each other and just being open to that communication of coming from a place of, hey, if we're all in this to help our children, let's work collaboratively rather than combatively, and let's talk in a way that is kind rather than negative or hurtful. And let's be clear that, hey, my goal is I want the very best for your children and for your child and for our next generation. Oh, so do I. Awesome. Let's figure out how we do that together. And if we can come from that place, then I think that's really where all good things will come from.
I love it, my dude. Where can people find more out about you and about the stuff that you are doing?
Sure. So my website is communityofteachers.com, and I'm on Instagram at The Confidence Constellation, which is the name of my toolkit. I have books on Amazon. I'm on Facebook. My email, I'm happy to give that out too. It's just my first name, Joshua, Joshua, last name, Faden, Faden @gmail.com. I respond to emails all the time from people all over. I love having these conversations. So I'm easy to find. I love to have these conversations, and I'm happy to continue them any way possible. So I appreciate the space to be able to do that.
And now the Middle Tree Minute.
This is Kristen Hernandez, Middle Tree's executive assistant. Here's an easy study hack for your student. Give them 2 notebooks. One is for class notes. The other is for rewriting or summarizing those notes in their own words at home. Rewriting focuses the brain to process, not just copy. It's like turning raw ingredients into a recipe. That second notebook can be the secret weapon for tests and essays. And that's the Middle Tree Minute.
And now a quick look into Dr. Atman's book, A Philosophical War. Well, Joe, here's one for you. And I think a lot of people have pondered this. So we as humans, little tiny humans, how do we connect to life itself or the universe itself or everything that's out there?
Little tiny humans.
Yep.
That's the biggest question for so many people. And it's kind of what a lot of people couch as an existential crisis, right? Because really at the heart of so many people's lives, so many people's work, almost everything that everybody does all day is an attempt to be rejoined to this ineffable something, to something that they can't really even define, that they don't really know, that they're pursuing nevertheless with no real direction because they haven't stopped to think about what they're doing or why, or we're just kind of going through life. And yet at the same time, we're all looking for connectivity. And not just to others, we're looking for something that goes even well beyond that veneer of whatever it is that we're engaged with, whether that be a person, again, whether that be our work, our religion, a belief, our culture. Everything that we do is this attempt to be rejoined to something that we can't really identify. So the purpose of the philosophical war is to try and not only identify that ineffable something, but to identify and then reconnect ourselves to that thing that's escaped us.
Thank you for listening to Educate Everyone with Dr. Joseph Atman and Tammy Trujillo. Join us each week as we explore the inner workings of our own minds and the educational system which builds and supports it. Also, check out our website at middletree.org to see what opportunities Middletree's programs can offer you or your student. And join us on social media. If you have any questions you'd like Dr. Atman to answer, please leave them on a post or send us a message, and you may hear them answered on the next episode of Educate Everyone. Until then, thanks for tuning in.